I'm Hallie Jackson with a breaking news special report. Donald Trump on trial and a stunning close to the day. The judge clearing the courtroom after getting sass from a new witness for the defense. We're talking about Robert Costello giving attitude on the stand, muttering, calling it ridiculous. At one point saying, geez, to the judge, who was like, stop, no, the press had to leave. So did almost everybody else, except for Mr. Trump's entourage of loyalists in the first couple rows. After what was presumably a dressing down, the judge let folks back in, and Costello, who seemed a bit chagrined at that point, carried on with his testimony. Now, remember why Costello matters here. He was the former legal advisor for the prosecution's star witness, Michael Cohen, who has said he can prove Cohen is lying. Costello just wrapped up getting cross-examined by the prosecution. He's going to be back on the stand tomorrow morning after a different cross-examination, a highly anticipated one. The defense team going after Cohen himself with a bunch of attempts to try to chip away at Cohen's credibility. Like another pretty extraordinary moment in court with Cohen acknowledging he stole something like $30,000 from the Trump organization, or saying that maybe he wants to run for Congress, or even possibly write a third book about the former president. This cross-examination seemed to drag, with our team in the courtroom reporting the jurors seemed less than compelled, rubbing their eyes, head in hands, shifting around in their seats. One thing that never came up, that 2017 meeting at the Oval Office, the prosecutors say is at the heart of the 34 felony counts Mr. Trump pleaded not guilty to for allegedly falsifying business records. So that is where things stand at the moment. It's possible that any second we could see Donald Trump walk out of court. It has not yet quite wrapped for the day, even though jurors are gone. And it's possible we could be in court for days longer, because now closing arguments, they're not going to be tomorrow like we thought last week. Instead, they're going to be next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, meaning at this moment, the 2 days of the trial this week are a big TBD. For the next 20 minutes, we're taking you inside all the rooms cameras could not be in for every key element coming out of court, what it means, why it matters, and maybe most importantly now, what's coming next. We've got our team of reporters and legal and political experts here to break it all down. Let's start with Vaughn Hilliard, who is live for us outside the courthouse. It is a news cliche to call them fireworks, Vaughn, but that's what they are, figuratively, of course, inside court today. Help us understand what went down with this defense witness, Robert Costello, and why it matters.
Right. It's notable because Robert Costello is their really one notable witness that the defense for Donald Trump chose to call here today. And within a matter of minutes, he was forcefully rebuked by the judge in front of the jury. It led to the jury and the press being asked to go out of the room. But before that took place, there were very direct remarks from Judge Merchan to Robert Costello, that witness who was a legal advisor to Michael Cohen, in part saying that I'd like to discuss proper decorum in my courtroom. If you don't like my ruling, you don't say, geez, you don't give me side eye, and you don't roll your eyes. Clear the courtroom. Again, these were very explicit messages that were being sent from Judge Merchan to Robert Costello. And ultimately, after a few minutes upon being re-entering the courtroom, the testimony from Robert Costello came to an end. He testified that Michael Cohen had told him back in 2018 that he had done this all by himself, the Stormy Daniels payment, and that Donald Trump did not direct him to do it. But under cross-examination, there were further questions that would have suggested that perhaps Michael Cohen was not being, fully honest with Robert Costello at the time, because those conversations came just a matter of weeks before he ended up working with federal investigators and playing guilty in admitting to crimes that he says he committed.
There was this moment today, and we were waiting to see what would happen with Michael Cohen's testimony, the finishing up, if you will, of this cross-examination. There was some back and forth that happened, not in front of the jurors, over the C-SPAN video from 2016. Should it be allowed into evidence? Should it not be? At one point, prosecutors were like, fine, we'll bring back a witness so that we can get this admitted into evidence. Why was this particular image that we're about to show so critical?
This had to do with conversations that Michael Cohen and Donald Trump had in October of 2016, around the time that the payment was being made to Stormy Daniels. And this particular video that you're looking at was the night of October 24th, 2016. And Michael Cohen had testified last week that he had a phone call about 5 minutes after this video was taken between him, and you'll see that guy in the red tie there, the bald man, that's Keith Schiller, his bodyguard at the time, and that he, in that phone call, was put on the line with Donald Trump, where he says Donald Trump told him to execute that $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels. But then under cross-examination, Donald Trump's team called it into question, saying, well, we have text messages from around that same hour with Keith Schiller, in which you seem to want to talk to him related to a 14-year-old prank calling you. And Michael Cohen said, well, we talked about both of those things in that phone call. And this is where the prosecution brought this video evidence forward today, saying, look, this just 5 minutes before that phone call took place, you see Keith Schiller standing there on that stage with Donald Trump. The timing of it would make sense that Trump would have been with him when Michael Cohen placed that phone call.
Vaughn Hilliard live first there in downtown Manhattan. As we are looking now, this is a live look on the left side of your screen at the hallway. This is typically where we see the former president walk out. And Vaughn, one of the big questions is, what will he say, if anything, about the clearing of the court by the judge late today and about whether or not he will, in fact, take the stand? We know that one of his representatives has suggested he's wanted to. Other legal experts that we've spoken with have said if that happens, bad news potentially for the defense.
Right. One of his attorneys who is not working on this specific case, her name is Alina Hava.
Yeah.
She just this afternoon explicitly said that he should listen to the advice of his attorneys. And then the very next sentence says he wants to testify. So this gets at the heart of whether Donald Trump can be convinced that he shouldn't take the stand in his own defense. Because if he does, he subjects himself to hours and days of questioning from the prosecution, who would love it if he took the stand because they could ask him questions. Yet, you know, Donald Trump is somebody who in the past, in the E. Jean Carroll trial, chose not to take the stand, later wished that he had after he was found to have sexually assaulted her. He felt like he didn't have the chance to actually go and defend himself. And so the question here is for him, does he feel like in these public settings, when he leaves the courtroom and speaks in the hallway to cameras, is that enough of a platform for him to make his case? Or does he feel like come tomorrow, when he would need to be testifying, that he feels like he needs to do it under oath in front of the 12 jurors that are going to decide his fate?
Vaughn, thank you. As we keep an eye on this live picture now out of this camera inside the hallway in court, it is a familiar picture to all of you as we've been watching as court has been wrapping up for the day right here on NBC News Now during these special reports. I want to bring in a couple of attorneys who know Mr. Trump well. They defended him during his second impeachment trial, Michael Vanderveen and William Brennan. Thanks to you both for being here. Appreciate it. As we keep an eye, of course, on what's happening in the hallway here. William, let me start with you. Should the former president's team be nervous about the way the judge just slammed Robert Costello here?
Well, it's been a long trial. Tensions rise. It's a cumulative thing. And, you know, it's not unusual, but I think it's just
it's really not unusual to clear the court because a witness is getting sassy?
Well, it's not unusual for tempers to. I'm surprised there wasn't more of it in this case, but it really, it's just a red herring. It's nothing to focus on.
Yeah.
The thing to focus on is a disbarred lawyer saying that he stole $60,000 from his client. That's the lead of the day. So
this is the acknowledgement that Michael Cohen made that we referenced here at the top of the broadcast. I think it came out after tax to be something like $30,000, one of several ways in which Mr. Trump's defense team tried to chip away at Michael Cohen's credibility. You know, Mr. Trump
charge after tax.
Is he happy with the way his defense team is handling this now that it is their turn to make the argument for why Mr. Trump should not be prosecuted?
Is Mr. Trump?
Yeah, I know you're not in his head, but based on what you know about him.
I think so. I did not talk to him over the weekend, but I'll tell you that when I saw him Thursday coming out of court, he thanked his lawyers. He said he's paying his lawyers, and you could tell he was happy.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to pause for a moment because we are seeing Mr. Trump walk up to the microphone here in court in downtown Manhattan. We want to listen just for a second here to see what he has to say.
Thank you very much. You saw what we saw. That was an incredible display. I've never seen anything like it in my life. A tyrant. And everyone's talking about it. This is what we have. We have an acting judge, appointed judge by Democrats, by the club. And they're keeping now, I guess this is our fourth week, soon to be our fifth week. Not campaigning, but you saw what happened, what just took place in that court. And hopefully the motion to dismiss this trial will go through, because this trial is a disaster for our country. It's a disaster for New York State, New York City. Greg Jarrett just says, where exactly is the crime?
All right, so there's former President Trump speaking outside court, as he has done now pretty frequently, I think almost daily since this trial began here, referencing what happened in court, the judge clearing the room, calling it something he'd never seen before, although William, you make the point, sometimes this happens. Sometimes tempers flare and you need to take a beat to reset for a bit.
We spent 8 weeks in that actual courtroom in front of Judge Merchan, and I think other than at the very end, there was a minor little thing that didn't clear the courtroom. But I mean, that's what happens.
Yeah.
People get tired. It's an emotionally and physically draining experience. And it sounded like, I mean, we're just listening like everybody else, but it sounded like the witness got a little flip. Any witness, it's not about the witness, it's about the case.
Yeah.
I think the real takeaway here is that the jurors are watching the interaction between the judge and the witness.
Although they weren't present when he dressed him down.
No, but he dressed him down because of what the witness was doing to him in front of the jury.
That's right.
Jeez
and ridiculous and all this, right?
Disrespect. And what people need to understand is the jury respects the judge. The jury likes the judge. All juries like the judge. And our experience is the jury's really like Juan Merchan. He's professional. He's courteous. He is what you expect to see sitting up at the top of a bench in a black robe.
He's Spielberg's version of the judge.
So you're saying he's out of central casting?
He's out of central casting. Yeah. I'm not talking about rulings, political beliefs. I don't know anything about that. But I know that in general, jurors like and respect judges. It's kind of like a father figure. And this guy in particular really has a lot of charisma, and they like him. So taking the judge on in his own courtroom, not a good idea when you're a witness.
Let me ask you both, given the fact that you have argued cases on behalf of former President Trump, William, to you, if he wants to testify, if he really wanted to testify, do you think that Todd Blanche could convince him otherwise, given the very clear and obvious risks?
Blanche looks like he played rugby, or Blanche looks like maybe he can get him in a half Nelson, but he's got to keep him off that stand. They got to duct tape him in a chair somewhere, because Blanche has done a phenomenal job on this cross. I mean, talk about a guy that paces himself. I thought he buried the lead when he brought out the fact that the call was really about a 14-year-old child that this lunatic wanted the Secret Service to go after.
So this is this 96-second phone call that's at the heart of some of the cross-examination.
I thought that was a knockout punch. And then today he comes out with stealing, whether it's $60,000 or $30,000. In the world of attorney discipline, stealing from a client is like first-degree murder. It's the worst thing you can do.
Although,
and now he wants to run for, well, he might qualify for Congress.
There is a question about whether or not the sort of length of the cross-examination kept the jury engaged, frankly, because some of our team in the courtroom suggested they saw, listen, it's a long day. It's a long day for the jury. They were sort of shifting in their seats, their head in their hands, they're rubbing their faces.
It was a long couple days, actually.
That's right.
It's 2+ days of cross-examination. But there was another week you could have gone with a guy. You've really got to. You've really got to be in Blanche's position and say, I got to hit these points, and that takes time.
And Al, there's this whole narrative that Cohen's trying to sell, and apparently Hoffinger's buying into it, because on the cross of this witness, Costello, she said, "Would you have empathy for a poor man whose apartment was raided?" I mean, this nonsense that Cohen's telling about it, what he did to my family. No, who says that? Somebody whose family is rear-ended by a drunk driver, or somebody whose home is broken into. He did these actions himself, and he can't blame anybody. The man in the moon, the dog ate his homework. He did them himself.
It's going to be up to a jury to decide, not any of us sitting around this table. And that jury decision is likely now not going to come until at least next week, if not longer. Do you think that this delay now until Tuesday works in Mr. Trump's favor here? The judge made the point, there's going to be a break. We got Memorial Day. He's basically saying the calendar is the calendar, so he doesn't want to start closings until the jury will have some time all in a row to deliberate.
Hallie, it's really too early to answer that question, because there's more defense coming. I think they will put on an expert witness from the FEC. I think there's a chance, and I know a lot of people disagree with me, I think there's a good chance he's testifying.
A good chance?
A good chance.
Did Donald Trump testify? A good chance?
He's gnawing at the bit to testify. He has the experience of regretting once that he didn't testify. And in retrials, when you don't do that, you do testify
I agree
the
with
next
Mike.
time.
I wouldn't write them off.
All right.
I wouldn't write them off
William
at all.
Brennan, Michael Vanderveen, I know you both have a busy afternoon. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks
We're going to
for having
save
me.
this tape. We're going to clip it and roll it back next week when we see. Thank you both very much.
Thank you for
I want to
having
get to our NBC News legal analysts, Danny Savalos and Catherine Christian. So you just heard the conversation here from two attorneys who know Mr. Trump well. Danny, I want to pick up on that thread with you. Do you think that the defense was effective in the cross-examination today of Michael Cohen and in bringing Robert Costello forward?
Oh, the Philly accents are thick today, Hallie, with Bill Brennan.
I didn't know Savalas was going to be on there.
Bill Brennan and the V is on. Oh, my goodness. Listen, they made a lot of good points. And, you know, here in this case, hello, gentlemen.
Hello, Danny.
The defense, you know, really, I don't think there's too much to worry about in the sense that, look,
What do you mean?
I think it's a bigger deal that they probably, if they were just going to call Costello, and we don't really know that he's the last witness, maybe just rest and then go with the whole reasonable doubt, didn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, presumption of innocence. I wonder if calling Costello, if that's really their only point, if it's just such a minor point that, and I want to be clear here, the burden of proof never shifts to the defense, but whether or not they created the specter of the burden shifting to them in the sense that they're undertaking to prove something, where they have the burden to prove nothing, 0.0. They have no burden whatsoever. So I wonder if maybe, look, by the way, I'm not criticizing that choice. You got to make choices at trial. They're tough choices. It's easy for me to sit here in this air-conditioned studio and say, hey, that was a bad call. But, you know, maybe not call Costello, maybe do call Costello. So far, it's not going well because of the way Costello is testifying. But look, you take chances during trial. Sometimes they work. Sometimes they maybe don't go as smoothly as you had hoped.
Before Cohen left, and we understand he is now back home at his apartment in New York, he did not speak or engage with reporters on his way out of court or into his home, Catherine. But I wonder, you heard Mr. Trump's attorneys in different cases talk about the way that the prosecution tried to perhaps elicit some sympathy for Michael Cohen, especially in the redirect there. He acknowledged that his life, he feels, Cohen said, has been made immeasurably more difficult because of what he has gone through with former President Trump. Is that an effective strategy?
It's an effective strategy. Quite frankly, I don't think the jurors are going to be sympathetic to Michael Cohen. The question for the prosecutors are, will they believe him? So for that part of his testimony that has not been corroborated, he has to be believed. I don't think anyone is going to be feeling sorry for him. He's a liar, he's a thief, but the argument is that's who Donald Trump wanted. That's who worked in the Donald Trump world. So I thought the redirect was effective in that it rehabilitated Mr. Cohen from last Thursday when the defense thought they caught him in a lie. And I think that the prosecutors have established for the jury, well, he wasn't lying. He talked to Donald Trump about Stormy Daniels a number of times. He spoke to him a number of times. So he was just mistaken.
And yet, Danny, and forgive me for asking a remarkably obvious question here, but why wouldn't the defense ask about that critical meeting in the Oval Office, something that the prosecution has pointed to as a linchpin to the heart of this matter, this so-called hush money payment and whether Mr. Trump knew what the money was going for?
So generally speaking, on cross, you're not going to ask a question that either you're not going to make any headway on or that the witness can throw back in your face and maybe do more damage. It's not a question of they just forgot about these facts or forgot about that meeting. The defense is so immersed in these facts, they've forgotten more about this case than we'll ever know. That's what happens when you're on trial. So they know about it. They made a conscious decision not to go into that. And my guess is that it was a strategic one, thinking that, look, this is the kind of thing that if we ask him about, he's going to double down. By the way, they asked a lot of questions that Cohen did double down on, even when he may have had spotty memory. So my guess is that they avoided this because they just didn't think they'd be able to make any headway on it, or they felt that the prosecution didn't establish that conversation, although that seems a little unlikely to me because that evidence did come in and it was unrebutted. So, I mean, it really comes down to a strategic choice. By no means, there's no way they just forgot.
So, Catherine, that's that Oval Office meeting at the heart of the matter in these charges against former President Trump in this historic criminal trial. The spicy moments that we saw at the end of court today perhaps don't get to the heart of the matter in such a degree, but former President Trump did address them in the hallway just a couple of minutes ago, and he said something. He said the press got thrown out. I imagine they're not very happy. that is true, right? I mean, typically losing access to a courtroom at a moment of historical importance is critical. Interestingly, though, Catherine, former President Trump's called them an entourage. Some of his supporters who showed up to sit in the first couple of rows were not cleared from court. Is that unusual for some of the courtroom to be cleared, not all of it? What does that say to you about this moment?
Well, typically you don't clear out people who are there for the defense. So defendant's family, defendant's friends. I'm not sure why Judge Merchan cleared the courtroom. He was on the record chastising the defense witness, Mr. Costello, who was acting for a lawyer, acting outrageous on the stand, being disrespectful to the judge. But typically you wouldn't get rid of who the defendant has brought into the courtroom.
Catherine Christian, Danny Savalos, another interesting day in court as we barrel towards potentially a finish as early as next week. Thank you both very much for being with us. I want to bring in now our team who has covered Mr. Trump extensively to get into some of the rest of what's at play here, including the politics. New York Times investigative reporter David Fahrenthold, Wall Street Journal senior political correspondent Molly Ball, and NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. Chuck, since we are here in your building, the house that Chuck built, talk to me about how you see Robert Costello as a witness here, somebody who's come forward who perhaps, clearly isn't a fan of Michael Cohen, clearly isn't a fan of some of the other players in this case here. Talk me through your takeaways.
Look, it's an interesting, it feels like, look, I don't want to get into putting Trump on the couch, but it almost feels like the lawyer said, okay, they want to have somebody who can be tough on behalf, perhaps, and you almost have that feeling that this was done in some ways to appease the client a little bit, to fight back. But
because Donald Trump likes the optics of an attorney who will fight on his behalf.
He wants a fighter on this front. Look, I think we all know if he could testify without being cross-examined, he'd be testifying. But he's been in enough depositions to know that
cross-examination comes with the territory.
Of course it does, and it probably doesn't help his case. But I bet it would be good politics for him to testify. So that is one thing I'm wondering, is how much Trump is calculating what is good politics versus what is good legal strategy, because it may not be the same thing.
Do you agree? I mean, we heard from some of the former president's former attorneys in a separate case that there's maybe a good chance he could testify. Good chance?
I don't know if it's good chance because look, I would not be shocked if he testified because there's an arrogance to him that believes he can handle anything. And he doesn't have people around him that tell him no very often on that front. But, there is also moments where he seems to get the moment, if he thinks that puts him in more personal jeopardy, then I think he won't do it. But my guess is the way to talk him out of it and say, do you want to end up in jail? That's the way to keep him out of it, that if you don't testify now, you probably have a better shot at getting the conviction thrown out. That's the legal advice he's being given. I just think the political instinct in him,
the pull,
is to testify and fight.
I see you nodding, Molly.
Well, I think the bottom line here is that he does not want to be convicted. That's it. And period, end of story. And he can bluster all he wants about how the whole thing is a political witch hunt and he doesn't care one way or the other because he's never viewed it as legitimate and the prosecutor was out to get him. And we've heard that from him many, 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 many times. But he doesn't want to be convicted. And I think the legal consensus that it would put him in more jeopardy is pretty absolute, that it's not a good idea for the legal case for him to testify. And when it comes to making the political argument, he's doing that outside of court every day. He's doing it when he walks in and he's doing it when he walks out. And it gets on the news sometimes and it's out there on social media. And now the thing that has surprised me most about this trial is the backup that he's getting from so many Republican lawmakers and other allies who are going up there and helping him make the case. So he has been able to really set the political narrative in the media by making the case himself and having an entire political party back him up in the political case that he's making. So he doesn't have to testify to do that. But But you know, it's absolutely true that, you know, he has political interests and legal interests here, and I think he's been very clever about sort of recognizing that from the beginning and taking great care to steer the political narrative at the same time as something completely different might be happening in the courtroom.
There have been many compelling moments in this trial. There have been some moments that are dry, and we can just say that, and we can just call it what it is. And for the jury, for these 12 New Yorkers who are going to ultimately decide the fate of this past and potentially future president, they've had to be in there following every minute of it. It can get weedsy, David. You are somebody who understands the weeds, who has been and lived in the weeds as it relates to former President Trump. What are your big takeaways at the moment here? What do you think the jury is thinking about right now? That's a speculative question, but you get what I'm saying.
Well, you have to think, are they thinking about the 34 counts of document falsification? So much of the trial and the testimony from Stormy Daniels and other people, even Costello's testimony, have been about other stuff and other places, the far more interesting things in places than the 34 counts at issue. So you wonder if they get in the room and think about, okay, what do we actually know about these charges we're supposed to be deciding about? And in some cases, the only documentary evidence or the only evidence about what happened and why it happened, remember why is really important to proving a felony in this case, comes from Michael Cohen. And so I do think all the effort that the defense has put into trying to impeach Cohen or trying to make him look like a liar, which certainly went to jail for lying, that's the most important thing that's going to matter here, right? To the actual outcome of this case, not Stormy Daniels or anything else. Do people believe Michael Cohen when he says, Donald Trump told me to do this and told me to lie about it. Here's why he told me to lie about it.
Is it striking to you that we are continuing to see now this sort of Republican roll call of people show up with former President Trump in court?
No, I don't think so. I don't think, you know, from Access Hollywood to now, I don't think I'm ever surprised when elected Republicans see a chance to help themselves by standing behind Donald Trump and being the first. I mean, just think about Chris Christie, right? If you're the first guy to do what nobody else will do and stand behind Trump in a situation where everybody else is running away, there's huge benefits for you. So
look what it got Chris Christie, David.
Well, I mean, it got him pretty far.
Sorry, Rick Scott thinks he's going to be Senate Republican leader.
Right.
He was the first one. He broke this ice.
That's right.
He started this. And, you know, some of it is for, look, as you know.
Just to your point, though, Chris Christie did end up running the transition. I mean, you're absolutely right that he got rewarded in the
He's been on the backside of the arc now, but the arc went up for him for a while.
But look, when it, you know, there is a part of this where he's, I think he sees these folks see an opportunity to essentially just gloss over because they've seen what happens when they don't stand by him. Because
he remembers.
If you don't stand by him, you get mowed over. But it's remarkable to me that you had to ask that question, are you surprised to see this? And that your answer is, well, no, not since Access Hollywood. I think it's an important, not since Access Hollywood. Are we living in the non-normal times or not? Like this should be weird. It is odd that American politicians are thumbing their nose at the rule of law so easily before we've heard from a jury, before we know the actual verdict. So it is, this part to me is really disconcerting, and yet we're all just like, emoji shrug, because this is our normal ever since the Access.
To that point, it's a pretty inside baseball group showing up today, right? I mean, it's Speaker Mike Johnson, who showed up last week. I think a lot of Americans, at least some of them, would know who he is. Bernie Kerik, I don't know, Alan Dershowitz, probably not.
I can't believe, I'm sorry, I saw Bernard Kerik out there. This is one of the most disgraced individuals in the history of federal government. I mean, what happened when he was nominated to the Department of Homeland Security. You talk to George W. Bush and those people, it is a nightmare. They still blame Rudy Giuliani for that. You know, they got talked into that. One of the most embarrassing episodes of the second Bush term. And there he is out there with sort of this, serving as a character witness for Donald Trump. America in 2024.
It's a split screen, too, because you have President Biden, who's been out to a degree on the road. We saw him out this weekend. He was trying to make inroads with black voters. You have former President Trump complaining that he cannot campaign because he's tied to court. Court is obviously not happening every day, Molly, and we saw him, for example, this weekend in Dallas at the NRA convention as well. There is still an opportunity for him to get his message out, and as you point out, he has the chance to do that every single day at 5 o'clock p.m. or 4:30 or whatever.
Well, and I think he's actually been pretty effective at getting the message out that he wants people to hear both about the trial and to be able to keep campaigning, talking about, policy, talking about the election, talking about his personal grievances or Hannibal Lecter or whatever the heck is on his mind. But he still has, that ability to break through. And I do wonder if there isn't some angst on the Democratic side about the fact that they don't have any sort of counter narrative in place. And I know that, the president wants to be respectful of the independence of the justice system and not put further strain on the doubts that so many people already have about it. But what it means is, I think you see in the polls the needle sort of moving toward Trump's view of the case. More and more people viewing it as a political prosecution, and there's not any sort of counter narrative on the political side to make the opposite case.
Very quickly.
I just found this asymmetric warfare, right? This is something that we all had to deal with as journalists, right? He come and attack our dispositions, you know, the legal system. It would be absurd if the prosecutors held their own dueling press conferences, right? But, you know, sometimes prosecutors do that, but then it almost, then you're playing his game and you're helping to play it. Like, I watch what Fani Willis is doing. And I don't know if that's helping the cause, that she's almost out there campaigning for the legitimacy of her case to the point of like, well, why are you, you know, it's uncomfortable when it looks like you have to campaign for something that's already been accused of being a politically motivated trial. It's just, this is where Trump's just shamelessness sometimes, that the system is an advantage.
Chuck Todd, Molly Ball, David Fahrenthold. It's too bad we don't have anything to talk about these days, you know? Thank you all so much for being with us. We'll do it all again tomorrow with our special coverage of Donald Trump's historic criminal trial. We've got a lot of other big headlines tonight, though. We're going to catch you up on all of it when we pick up our regular programming right after this break.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.